Meg Wallace walked up Cal Whitmore's drive at sundown with a 3-month-old baby against her chest and a canvas satchel over her shoulder. And she did not knock on his door because she did not have the strength left to. She sat down instead on the top porch step. The baby had gone quiet an hour ago. She put her hand along his small, warm forehead to be sure. He was breathing. He was only asleep. She sat and waited to be found. Cal Whitmore came around the corner of the barn 10 minutes later with a bucket in each hand and stopped when he saw her. He set the buckets down slowly. "Ma'am," he said. She looked up at him. She was not going to cry. She had cried out 3 days ago and now she was past it. She said, "Sir, my name is Meg Wallace. My baby is Silas. I have $30 in a boot and no other place to be. I am asking for 1 night's shelter in your barn. I do not ask for a meal. I can pay $1 if you would let me stay in the barn 1 night. If you would prefer to say no, please say so plainly, and I will walk on." Cal Whitmore stood in his own yard with a bucket at each foot and looked at her a long moment. Then he walked over to the porch step and went down on one knee 10 feet from her, so his face would be lower than hers. "Mrs. Wallace," he said, "you are not going in the barn. You are going in the house. You are going to eat a plate of my supper. The baby is going to sleep in the cradle in my back room. My name is Cal Whitmore. My wife Lucy died 2 winters back. Her cradle has been in the back room ever since, because I have not been able to look at it in the light. I have been looking at it in the dark for 2 years, wondering what it was still doing in my house. Now I know. Come inside." Meg Wallace looked at Cal Whitmore. She said, "Sir, I do not know how to answer that kindly." Cal Whitmore said, "Say yes, ma'am, and come in." She said, "Yes." He carried the baby in himself, careful as a man carrying a lantern. She followed with the satchel. He set the sleeping child in the cradle in the back room, and Meg Wallace stood in the doorway of the room and looked at the small, dark, carved cradle with the small pillow and the small folded quilt, and she put her hand against the doorframe. Cal Whitmore said quietly, from the kitchen, "Wash the dust off your face at the pump when you are ready. There is soup on the stove. It is not much. There is a chair at the plank table." Meg Wallace stayed a moment more in the back room doorway. She looked at her sleeping son in another woman's cradle. She thought, without meaning to, that a life could be turned upside down in 3 months and set right side up in 1 afternoon, and that it did not seem fair to the one and did not seem fair to the other. And that fair was, she was learning, not the word for what a country could give you. She washed the dust off her face. She sat down at the plank table. She ate the soup. She told him at the plank table, slowly, over 3 cups of coffee, what had brought her. She had married Ephraim Wallace at 19. He was a miner in a company town in Idaho. He had been a good young man. He had signed a company scrip against the store the year they married. He had signed more scrip when Silas was coming. He had signed a great deal of scrip in 3 years, and Meg had not, until he died, known how much. He had died on a Tuesday morning in April, when a shaft had come down. He had left her with Silas, aged 2 months, and, the company man told her at his gravesite, $312 owing to the store. $312, ma'am, the company man had said. "Debt does not die with the husband, ma'am. The company will consider terms. There is work at the store, ma'am. You could work it off in perhaps 4 years. There would be room and board in the company boarding house for you and the child. You would not have to worry, ma'am." He had said all of this the day of her husband's funeral, standing next to his grave. Meg had not answered. She had gone home. She had thought about the 4 years in the company boarding house with her son in the company nursery. She had thought about, would consider terms. She had, that night, put $30 into her boot, and 48 biscuits into a canvas satchel, and Silas against her chest, and had walked out at midnight to the depot road, and had climbed into the back of a freight wagon whose driver, an old man called Cody, had known Ephraim, and had said, when she had explained herself, that he was going as far as Rock Springs, and she was welcome to the wagon bed. Rock Springs had put her on another freight, which had put her on another freight, which had put her at a crossroads in the eastern Nevada plain 2 days ago. She had walked from the crossroads. She had asked at 2 homesteads. The first had turned her away. The second had let her water her canteen. The third was Cal Whitmore's. Cal Whitmore heard the whole of it out. He did not interrupt. He said, "At the end, Mrs. Wallace, that debt does not follow you across the state line into Nevada. The company town in Idaho is one law, and this county is another, and Idaho debt is not enforceable here. Sheriff Baird will confirm it. I will send my hired man to town at first light to ask him to ride out." Meg Wallace stared at him. "You are sure?" He said, "I am not a lawyer, ma'am. Sheriff Baird will know." Meg Wallace, who had not cried out 3 days ago as she had thought, cried again. Cal Whitmore let her cry. He did not touch her. He got up and put another pot of coffee on, and let her cry a full minute at his plank table. She said when she had stopped, "I am sorry." Cal said, "You are not sorry, ma'am. Do not apologize." Sheriff Baird rode out at 10 the next morning. He was 50, and had a slow, careful face, and had been the sheriff of that county 11 years. He sat at Cal Whitmore's plank table and listened to Meg Wallace tell the story of the debt. He said, "At the end, Mrs. Wallace, debt does not cross a state line without a court order. The company store in Idaho cannot enforce a debt against you in Nevada without going to court in Idaho and getting judgment, and then going to a Nevada court and asking it to enforce that judgment, and that court is likely to laugh them out on account of the widow and baby facts. It will not happen. If a company man shows up here to argue about it, you send for me. I will handle it." He wrote her an affidavit on the spot, swearing that she had reported the debt to him, and that he had judged it unenforceable in his county. He signed it. He stamped it with a small brass stamp from his coat pocket. He gave it to her. He said, "That paper is worth more than the man who comes to argue about it. Keep it in your Bible." Meg said, "I will." Sheriff Baird finished his coffee. He said, on the porch, to Cal Whitmore, in a voice lower than Meg was meant to hear, "Cal, I have known you 11 years. That is a good widow and a good baby. You are a good man. Do not make her feel she owes you a thing, and let her decide what she wants when she is rested. But if it is what I think it is going to be, do not let it be otherwise from stubbornness. Neither of you is getting younger." Cal Whitmore said, "Understood, Sheriff." Sheriff Baird rode off. Meg Wallace stayed on at Cal Whitmore's ranch as his housekeeper for the summer, and then the fall, and Silas Wallace slept in Lucy Whitmore's cradle every night. And Cal Whitmore came in from the pasture at dusk and washed his hands at the pump and sat down at his plank table, and Meg Wallace put a plate in front of him, and he called her Mrs. Wallace, and she called him Mr. Whitmore for 6 weeks. And then he called her Meg, because he could not any longer stand not to, and she called him Cal, because it had begun to be strange not to. He hired his older neighbor, Mrs. Gorst, to come stay at the ranch 4 nights of the week as a chaperone that first summer, so that no soul in 3 counties would speak an idle word about the widow and her baby under his roof. Mrs. Gorst, 64 and shrewd, took the $4 a week and made it $4 worth of hard-won social respectability, and by the end of the summer had told everyone in the county not only that the Whitmore Ranch had a good-hearted young widow with a very good baby keeping it, but also that Cal Whitmore was a fool if he did not marry her by Christmas. Mrs. Gorst had a wide currency in the county, and it did its work. Meg learned the ranch. She learned to milk Cal's 2 cows without letting them kick over the pail. She learned to churn butter that would keep. She put up a good pantry of pickled beans, and canned peaches, and dried apples for the winter, because Cal had not had a proper pantry in 2 years. She read the newspaper aloud to him at supper. She played, very badly, a small tune on Cal's late wife's parlor organ one Sunday afternoon, and Cal laughed and said Lucy would have laughed too, and Meg's shoulders unwound another inch that had been wound tight since the Idaho depot. Silas grew. He rolled over. He sat up. He got his first tooth. He got his second. He grinned at Cal the first time in August, and Cal, who had come in tired from the branding, sat down on the plank floor and let the baby press a small biscuity fist into his beard, and Meg watched from the counter and put her apron up to her face for a moment. She said, quietly, "Cal." He said, "Yes, Meg." She said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to be plain with me. Are you letting me stay here because you need the housekeeper, or because you would rather I did not go?" Cal Whitmore, on the plank floor with a small child rubbing biscuit into his beard, said, "Meg, I need a housekeeper the way a rain barrel needs a rain. I would sooner have you here than have any housekeeper I ever met, and I have known you 3 months. I would not tell a woman on my floor with my son in her arms that the reason was the housekeeping. It is not. It has not been since June. I have been waiting until Silas cut his second tooth to say so, because I did not want you to think a man was pressing a woman who had not yet slept properly. He has cut it. Meg, I have been in love with you since the second time you laughed at supper. I did not know I could be in love with a person who cried at my table the first night and laughed at it the second week. I am. It is the surprise of my life." Meg Wallace put her apron down. She said, "Cal." She said, "Yes." He said, "Yes what?" She said, "Yes to everything you have been holding in since June, Cal Whitmore. Yes to the question you have not asked. Yes to the answer I have been getting readier to give since July. Ask me and I will say it again." He asked her. She said it again. Silas laughed one small clear syllable at the ceiling, as if he had just told the joke. The circuit preacher married Cal Whitmore and Meg Wallace in the yard of the Whitmore Ranch on the last Sunday of October. Sheriff Baird came out and stood witness for Cal. Cal's older sister Maddie rode down from Boise and stood witness for Meg. Silas, aged 9 months, sat on Maddie's lap through the ceremony, and behaved himself for exactly the length of "for as long as ye both shall live," and then wailed at the preacher. The preacher laughed. Cal laughed. Meg laughed. Everyone laughed. Afterward, in the mild yellow afternoon, Cal walked with Meg out to the pasture behind the barn, where the 2-year-olds were grazing. He carried Silas in one arm and offered Meg the other. She took it. She said, "Cal." He said, "Meg." She said, "I never thanked you for taking us in." He said, "You did. You have been thanking me by the plate for 6 months. Do not thank me again. It was not charity. It was you, walking up my drive." Meg said, "I have been meaning to tell you something. I did not walk up your drive by accident. Old Cody the freighter told me at the Rock Springs stop that if I ever came to eastern Nevada, I should ask after a rancher named Cal Whitmore, who had once loaned him a wagon for 2 weeks free of charge in the year '79, and had not asked to be paid back. He said, Meg, that if the world had any decent men left in it, one of them was Cal Whitmore of the Whitmore Ranch at the fork of Elk and Broken Wash. I asked at 2 homesteads on the way and turned north at the fork because Cody had told me to." Cal Whitmore stopped in the middle of his pasture. He said, "Cody." Meg said, "Cody." Cal Whitmore said, "That old man was 3 sheets under and could not stand up when I loaned him that wagon. I did not know he had noticed." Meg said, "He noticed." Cal Whitmore laughed once, a plain amazed laugh, and shifted Silas to his other hip and put his arm around his wife. He said, "Well, then remind me to send Cody a barrel of good molasses at Christmas." Meg said, "I will remind you." They stood in the pasture in the last yellow light, and Silas, on Cal's hip, gnawed at a bit of Cal's shirt collar and made a small pleased sound at the sky. And Meg Wallace Whitmore, who had walked up a stranger's drive at sundown with a baby against her chest and $30 in a boot, because an old freighter 3 states away had once been shown a decency he had not asked for and had told her about it, understood that the good slow country had, in its good slow way, brought a kindness back to a man who had not remembered doing it, and had given her, with her baby, a whole house in the doing, and it had.